Welcome back, class. Good to be with you. This is a continuation of Whitlock and Schluter Chapter 6. And I have here the examples. Frankly, we may discuss those in class, but I don't want to get into too much detail in this video at least. So I want to move into the remarks. Okay. Now, number one. There are many hypothesis tests. There's a book in the library called 100 Different Hypothesis Tests. It's not 100 examples. It's literally different theories, the whole thing. We're going to look at I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 in this class. Okay? It's not of interest to learn a bunch of tests. What's of interest is to learn the broad structure, which I've sketched today. In the last section. Now, next item, when we see this, newspaper articles assume the reader knows nothing. And so they blow the whole thing. They try to summarize, well, this drug has this effect on people, without going into the probabilities and the fact that there's a hypothesis testing structure. So newspaper articles, you just can't understand what's going on. On the other hand, journal articles, okay, they assume that you know what the details of the test are. So all they're going to give you is p-value, maybe a test statistic. That's it. They'll tell you what test, and they go. They don't give you the null hypothesis, don't give you the alternative. So the key thing is to understand what's going on in order that you can interpret what's going on in the journal article without knowing all the different tests. You can always look up the basics of a test. Now, in a particular test, there are 2 kinds of errors. So we want to take a look at these. Now, I've got a 2-way table here with reality and the decision. Okay? Now, the reality is the null may be true or false. Okay? And so depending on what the reality is, our decision may be correct or not. If the null is true and we accept it, boom, we got a correct decision, and there's a probability of this. Okay? 1 minus alpha. How do we know that? That's the level of significance that we tested with and that we use to control that, because we're assuming, you may not understand this now, but if you come back to it later, it'll make more sense. That probability distribution that we're drawing is called the null distribution. Okay, the null distribution. That parameter that we're testing is typically in the center of the distribution. Okay. Now, if null is true, but we don't accept it, we reject it, then that's called a type 1 error. And it occurs with probability alpha. That's the complement of this guy. Now, I apologize on behalf of the statistics community for the poor naming of a type 1 error. A better name is a false positive. We say positive because it means that we're rejecting H null. We're saying it's statistically significant. We've made the discovery, but we're wrong. Okay. Now, after data collection, the probability that you'll make that error is p-value. That's it. Okay, that's the first possibility, if the null is true. Second possibility then would be if the null is false. Okay? If the null is false and we reject it, bingo, we got a correct decision. And that occurs with probability 1 minus beta. Okay, what is 1 minus beta? Okay, well, let me come over here. If you accept H null when it's false, then that's called a type 2 error. And that occurs with probability beta. So beta is the probability that we accept H null given that H null is false. Okay, so let's write that out. Probability that we accept H null given H null false. Okay, and so that's beta. 1 minus beta then is, let's go down here. 1 minus beta is referred to as power. Okay, and so we want tests that have high power. That is a high probability of making the correct decision when we reject, if H null is really false. That's what I said. Okay, so type 2 is a false negative. Okay, we have said that we accept the null, but we're wrong, and it occurs with probability beta. Okay, I think that covers that. Last item then is an analogy. And it's my hope that by this analogy you'll catch a feel for the structure here. It's not symmetric. You can tell that things are weighted towards the null hypothesis. Very, very clear. And this is actually parallel to the American judicial system. Okay? Now, I have heard it or seen it written that when our judicial system was formed, it was formed in order to protect the innocent, and this was done by raising the stringency level for a conviction. Okay? And the goal was to keep the innocent out of prison, so much so that we would let 10 guilty go, possibly even 100 guilty go, for every one innocent that is put into prison. Okay? And that's why we have this innocent until proven guilty, and guilty only when evidence is beyond the shadow of a doubt. Okay, so what's the analogy? The defendant is the null hypothesis. The assumption is that we assume H null is true. So the null hypothesis is in the courtroom and it's presumed innocent, so we assume it's true, and then we card in the evidence, and the evidence comes in the form of the data, which turns into a statistic. You summarize it, and then we calculate the p-value from it. And so the p-value is the evidence. Now I use that p-value to make a decision, and we do it in the following way. We say p-value less than or equal to the level of significance, and that level of significance is my reasonable doubt. So whatever is reasonable doubt, depending upon the context. Again, the traditional number we'll use is 5%. Okay? You fall below that, boom, guilty. Okay? Well, we can make a mistake. If we convict the innocent, that's the bad one. That is the type 1, and that is the false positive error. Okay, if we're doing a drug test and the drug company comes up, voila, it works. There's a very significant result. We need to get this thing on the market ASAP. Okay, and then we start selling it, and maybe it costs more, maybe it has worse side effects, who knows, but it's a change in the market. And you know what? It actually didn't do anything. So now we're pumping a bad drug on the public. That's a tragedy. On the other hand, the other error is we let off the guilty. That's the type 2. And that is a false negative. in the drug example, we're testing the drug, and as much as we wanted to, it didn't turn out in our tests to show a significant improvement. Therefore, we don't launch it. What's the error? Well, the error is it actually is a little bit better. We just didn't detect it. And so the public missed out on that discovery. But we could still make it later. Public health is preserved. And that wraps up all the main ideas for hypothesis testing. See you in class.